Hey everyone, welcome to Filipina on the Rise. I'm Crystal Fabella, host and founder. I really hope you enjoy this next episode. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss out on new video content. You can find all episodes on most podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, and more. Thanks so much for tuning in and enjoy this next episode.
I first wanted to actually acknowledge and thank you for how vulnerable and real you put yourself out there to be. I think it opens up for a lot of different opinions, different comments, and people just not knowing how to wrestle with things they've never heard before, right? And I want to give you like a huge acknowledgement for stepping out and allowing yourself to be that expressive and to give us, I think, a space that a lot of people need. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're going to make me cry, which I tend to do anyways. And I'm all for embracing my tears. So
great. I'm ready for the Tuesday morning tears. So Joe, I think everyone could be pretty prepared for us diving into some real juicy topics.
Yes.
Something that we tend to keep taboo. And this is about relationships and how that has maybe been influenced, especially when it comes to intergenerational practices, Filipino culture, and things that Filipino women may be facing these days and not even notice that they're deeply rooted in these roles and expectations we've seen growing up in these relationship models. When I asked you what topics do you want to explore on this show, I was like not expecting that we would go here. And I'm actually so thankful because it's made me reflect so much on like, oh, with past relationships, like that's where it's come from. But that we're just peeling back the surface. Anyways, thank you for coming on Filipina on the Rise, Joe.
Yes, of course.
You're a huge figure in our community. And I just can't wait to dive in. Joe, the first question I always start with is this. And I actually wanted to preface it because you said in one of your blog posts, like your many identities and your identities are always changing and we need to learn how to embrace that we can be different things per season. So in your own words, who is Joe Encarnacion? What is your current mission?
Yeah. So, first off, thanks for having me on, and thank you for inviting a really raw and unfiltered conversation, because I think, a lot has been on my mind about just the intersectionality of where we are in our just lives. So who am I? In a nutshell, I am a woman in progress. I like to think that I am a rebel with my own cause. And my mission is to help women to fully become emotionally fit and sexually liberated through radical self-acceptance.
That is, that sounds like it came from a long journey of that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm pretty sure when you were in high school or college, you didn't wake up one day and say, I think this is the work I'm going to do. Which is great. This is why we dive into these stories. I'm actually going to change up my, really quick. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just going to lose the mic.
Yeah, no worries.
So Joe, you started your fitness journey around 2013, right?
Yeah.
And you said you wanted it to be emotional, mental, but slowly started getting into what became more of like a physical journey, and getting caught up in these things. And it brought up a lot of questions. Like in order to be a wellness influencer, you need to be a certain way. So it brought on all these pressures. But I actually want to bring it back before that journey and actually into your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about your own upbringing and the different things that influenced your mission and was the foundation for that. And I'd love to explore how Filipino culture has influenced this. And I like also that you said that like being Filipinx is actually just one of your many identities. So can you take me back to Joe as a little girl?
Yeah, so I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm first generation Filipino American, and I didn't really have the most cheerful upbringing I had tearful moments for sure when I look back, but my upbringing was filled with a lot of adversity, a lot of sad moments, actually. I was molested by an uncle, or like a family friend at 8 years old. And then I dealt with a lot of family just abuse and domestic violence in my house because of the different generational gaps. So my parents grew up in the Philippines. My brother and sister are 10 and 8 years older than me, and they grew up in the Philippines as well. And so it was like being raised with two sets of parents in my household. And being Filipino American, and you have quote unquote two sets of parents, you get in trouble a whole lot just for being who you are, just for trying to actually differentiate your own identity away from your family of origin, which is what we spend our lives doing when we start to grow up, right? And so, just like most Filipino American girls, I don't know if the guys got this, but I know the girls did. I grew up in a lot of family cultures where they were like, oh, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you got to eat more, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to be this way. In order to be loved, you got to look like this. In order to have a husband, you got to be lighter. And it was like, can I just be myself for once? Can I figure out who the fuck I need to be in this whole world, in addition to dealing with like processing through lots of trauma as a little child and as a young girl. And so a lot of my upbringing shaped the way I experience life now, because there was a lot for me of just like, wait a second, everything that you guys are telling me does not feel intuitively right for me. Meaning that like, I'm supposed to be a doctor, or I'm supposed to marry rich, or I'm supposed to have this type of career. And I was like, that's not what I want to be. That's not who I want to be. For whatever reason, when I was younger, I felt really drawn to the arts. I got into photography in my high school years. And so that was my first dose of artistic creativity. And I got into photography because I was actually trying to find ways to cope with my anxiety and depression from just growing up in a household that had a lot of this like domestic violence. And when I say domestic violence, I know it sounds really violent, but it's probably what a lot of us in our first generation, like the first generation American, like Asian Americans or Filipino Americans experience, where you're getting spanked, right, for like speaking up, or you're getting yelled at for not doing your homework right, or not waking up, or like not finishing your milk at dinner. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, dude, why are you having me drink milk? I'm already like 15. I shouldn't be drinking milk. This is shit like that. And
Normalized into like, oh, this is punishment for
yeah, and I get it though. I totally get it, because generationally, culturally, that's how they were brought up, right? So for me, I understood at a young age, I can accept you and I can accept our differences. However, I still need to also be me, and I still want to develop who I am. So I got into the arts that way. And then I remember falling in love with my hair at one point. And it was also kind of like a rebellious thing. Like my mom wanted me to have long hair because she thought having long hair meant I was more suitable as like a woman to find a husband. And so I was 16 years old. I finally like scrounged up enough money to get a haircut and color job. And so I cut it super short and like fiery red. And I remember that was like my first, like, you know what? I am creating my own identity. As a 16-year-old girl, I'm creating who I want to be outside of what my family thinks is right, and outside of what my family shapes this perfected or acceptable female role in society, right? And so that, I think, like, the influences and my experiences of growing up, I think for me has always been, what do I need to do in order to unlearn the conditioning that has been brought upon me? And it's always been something that I have been unlearning from a young age in my own family structures. And that's kind of how it shaped my career path. It's kind of shaped my mission in life and my passions, because I was just kind of like, well, I need to unlearn all the things that you guys are teaching me because it doesn't feel right to me. That's it, just point blank.
Yeah. I'm curious. How do
Yeah.
how do you explain what you do to your family? titas, to titos, to people in the Filipino community. That's actually something I was thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because so my first career was in hair, and I did hair for 10 years. And then after that, I went to tech, and I worked at an art and tech company called Visco as a director of community and curation there. And then after that, I was really inspired by my role as a director, managing teams of like larger teams in the company,
Yeah.
and wanted to get into health and wellness coaching because I was just really kind of feeling empowered as a leader, because I approach things differently. Rather than telling my employees what to do, I gave them the space to figure out what to do, because I felt like empowered employees create better projects, and they allow for more freedom for the management team. And so now that I have kind of stepped into this hybrid role of being a social media influencer and a women's life coach and a speaker, trying to tell my family what to do, they just have no idea. They're like, oh, so I see you're on like advertising now. Like, are you a model or whatever? Or I'll tell them I'm flying. I was like, before COVID, I was like flying to LA for projects or photo shoots. And they're like, so are you like a model now? Like, what do you do? And so trying to explain is really hard, to be honest. And so I lean into, I am a public figure, and I do motivational speaking, and I am a women's life coach. And so that kind of gives it it gives them a better blanket statement of like what I do, without having to dive into the whole social media thing, because my parents and my family, for the most part, they're not on social media, and they're not in the tech world. And so they just don't get it.
It doesn't fit in those three boxes that we're supposed to go in, which is
Totally. It doesn't fit into the engineering. I mean, when I worked in tech, they were like, oh my God, you work in tech. And I was like, but I work as a director for community and curation. Like I'm not an engineer, but I work with the engineers, so.
I like it's digestible enough.
It's digestible enough. They're like, you're in a startup. Wow. Like it just.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't even try to explain anymore. You're just like, oh yeah, tech, blanket statement, good enough for them.
Totally.
Before I always like to learn about, so before you go into a role that you're advocating for women, you're teaching them these different techniques to become, like emotionally healthy, sexually liberated. Before one gets there, they usually go through some really like of their own shadow work, of their own deep, even like painful but freeing work, right? And I want to know what that journey was for you, how long it was, and up until the time when you're like, this is the work that I'm called to do. This is what women need right now, and this is what we're not talking enough about in relationships. So can you tell me about that like pre-era?
Yeah. So, I mean, my pre-era, I think, all came from my own life experiences, right? So, as I briefly mentioned, growing up, I've dealt with sexual trauma. I'm a sexual trauma survivor. And so, when I was 16 years old, I actually attempted to commit suicide due to the fact that I was raped by my ex-boyfriend. And that was a really hard journey for me, because I remember coming home from that experience, and I'm like, how the hell do I tell my parents this? Will they even understand what the hell this means? Because, I ran away, and this is, I felt that at the time, if I had told my parents that they would be like, well, this is your fault. You ran away, which is, the message that I feel like a lot of young women who experience sexual trauma, that until recently, have we actually peeled back the layers and said women, or whoever the person who experiences sexual trauma, they are not at fault, right? It's only been up until recently where we've said, you're not at fault for this. It's not due to your circumstances. It's not due to what you wore. It's not due to the situation that you put yourself in. And so for a long time, I think I carried that burden on myself. And so I attempted to commit suicide, and that attempt actually was my saving grace, because when my dad found me in the bathroom, they took me to the hospital, and then I was on I was court appointed therapy for about 4 or 5 years. And it was amazing, because it allowed me to process through so much of the trauma that I was dealing with in my own upbringing. It was allowing me to process my own feelings of loneliness and depression and all those things. And because of that, I remember kind of coming out of that onto the other side. And I remember it was like maybe junior or senior year. And I was like, I think I want to be a therapist. And I think I want to help um, young teenage girls who might be in this place where they do not know whether or not they belong.
Mm.
And then I remember like looking at how much school you needed to do to become a therapist and to have a PhD. And I was like, that's not going to be in my journey or my path, because my parents weren't we weren't privileged. We didn't have the means to put me through school like that. And so, when it comes to like my own mission and what I deeply believe in, I think a lot of it comes from knowing the really dark path that I've been able to climb out of, and the challenges and the adversity and just the darkness, and being able to like come out from the other side, like accepting myself and knowing that the traumas and the past do not make up who I am. They don't dictate my future. They are a part of me. They will always be an integrated part of me, but they don't need to haunt me anymore. And I think so oftentimes with women, when it comes to learning how to become emotionally well or emotionally fit, when it comes to becoming sexually liberated in themselves and really understanding their identity as a woman, and when I talk about sexual liberation, I look at sexuality as self-expression and identity, because at the core that's who we are, right? Like, we are sexual beings. We, men and women, are sexual beings. And for women in particular, we have been taught over time that our sexuality is dangerous. If you look a certain way, if you act a certain way, bad things are going to happen to you. Or if you think about sex, you're a dirty person, or you're wrong, or, you know, if you have sexual desires, like you're a slut or a whore. And it's almost like, wow, can we just embrace that?
Yeah.
Can we just actually embrace that? Because men are given a permission slip to be able to honor their sexuality. But as women, we're taught that if we do, we're sluts, we're shamed. We're shamed immediately for it, right? And to me, that was like really confusing, because it was like, wait a second, I'm a mother and I have a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old, and you're going to tell me that I should be ashamed of my sexuality, but it's the fact that I have a sexuality that actually allowed me to birth life. Mm-hmm. Which is confusing. And so, you know, for me, in terms of my work, like the emotional part is that it's the same thing. For so many women, we're taught that our emotions are what hinders us from being fully well-lived individuals. You're too emotional, you're too this, you're too sad, you're too that. You have to be a little bit more straightforward. You're so flighty when you're emotional. And I think to myself, I'm like, emotions are what gives us color to the drawings of our life. Like, we are emotional beings. That's where our self-expression comes from. You cannot have art if you don't have emotion. You can't have music without emotion. So for the rest of society to tell us you can't be emotional, I'm like, wait a second, that is our innate being, right? Like, that's who we are. And so to me, if we think about like the chakras, which is going back to the idea of just energetic alignment, our sacral chakra, which is right where our sex organs are, is the root of self-expression, emotions, and creativity, and then our sexual creation and creation of life. And so to me, I'm like, why can't those pieces be integrated for all of us as women?
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, like as Filipino women, because of, you know, colonialism and Catholicism and all these other beliefs, we are taught to shut down, and we are taught to not even express those parts of us. And I just like remember thinking to myself, this is kind of bullshit. Like, this is bullshit. Because if we look back at history of our culture, we grew up with over 500 years of feminism and beliefs of the babaylan, and women ruled the Philippines for a very long time through shamanism and just their ways of wisdom. And somehow we lost that through modern society and modern socialization. So I don't know, I'm just like trying to bring that shit back.
Right. Way back though.
Way back.
I love that you are bringing that in picture, because sometimes I think in order for us to reclaim our identity and who we truly are as women, especially Filipino, and we have to look back pre-colonial and see like who were we, what were you doing, and that is definitely something we're going to go into. Thanks for bringing that up. I did a lot of research and I was like, holy crap, we were like, women were powerful, we were considered healers, we were given a lot of respect in terms of like the roles, and there was like gender nonconformity, things like that. So we'll go back into that later, but to touch on the point, thank you for sharing that experience. In When I was in college, I was also I was raped, and I hid it completely from my parents, my community. I felt like I couldn't expect anything else but, oh, but you put yourself in that situation, you brought yourself there. And I actually, I internalized that. I think I truly did believe like, oh, this was in a way my fault, so I'm not gonna bring it out to the light. Upon going through all that, and it's funny, it just made me reflect when my parents did find out. There was shame for self, shame for the family, and shame for like what the community could be thinking. They're like, this is why we don't send you to public schools, all this stuff. But it also made me think about like how it almost marred the concept of like sex should be something that we empower ourselves with as women. It is a powerful thing, and we have the power of like creation basically. And right now I feel like I'm in a journey of like reclaiming like what is a sexual power, because something that was kind of just like hurt and painful for me earlier on, and it was packaged up as shame for me early on. Now I'm in this journey, and I think a lot of women are, in terms of like even defining like what is sexual empowerment as a woman and sexual liberation. How would you define that for women, Joe?
I think for me, like how I would define that is sexual empowerment is really all about empowerment of self. Ultimately, it's to me, it's being able to appreciate yourself as whole, without shame, without judgment, without fear. And that's that's not an easy route, but it is possible. I also think too, it's not being afraid of who you are, right? Sadly, as like women, we are so afraid of just being who we are. We're afraid of being strong. We're afraid of being bold. We're afraid of being too much or too little. And the crazy thing to me is like, I wonder, do men have the same concerns? Like, I really truly wonder, do
Yeah.
men ever wonder, are they too much? Are they too little? Are they being not enough? I mean, so much of it is woman focused, right? And the way that I see it, it's like the reason why this is so important to me is same like you, I grew up with so much of that shame. I carried on everyone's shame in that experience, in addition to my own, even in addition to my ex-boyfriend, right? Like my rapist, like I carried his own shame too, because I was like, oh my God, like he must feel ashamed of himself, whatever the fuck my thoughts were at the time. And I just remember like thinking to myself, I don't ever want my daughters to carry that same shame about their sexuality, because I was so confused after it. I was like, do I have the ability to own this? It's no longer mine, I think. Or how do I reclaim this back? Do I like what does it mean to actually step into my own sexual power? And at the end of the day, when I peel back the layers about sexuality, again, I think about sexuality, and the way that I look at it, it's sexuality is self-expression in its purest form. And so if I think about what does it mean to be empowered, well, I think it means to be yourself in your purest form. Because when we were born as like little children, we were born with confidence, we were born with like body autonomy, we were born loving ourselves until we were taught not to.
Yeah, slowly
Right?
over.
Slowly we're taught and conditioned to not like your body, to be ashamed, to cover up, to do these things, to look at yourself differently because somebody else looks different. And so to me, it's really about empowering yourself to look at yourself in the fucking mirror, naked or not, and saying, I am this version of me and I am fully, fully accepted in my power.
Mm. Speaking of looking at yourself in the mirror, you had an aha moment. I don't know when that was, but it was a powerful aha moment for you
Mm-hmm.
that formed the way forward. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so it was 2013, and my eldest daughter was 9 at the time. And she and I were getting ready for like a Sunday afternoon, spending with the family. And she said to me, "Mom, you are so beautiful." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm ugly and fat." The same way that most women say this to their girlfriends in the dressing room. And the look on her face is one I will never forget, because she like looked at me and then she left the room, and I was like, holy shit, I just took away the truth of what this little girl knew, which was that her mom is a queen in her eyes. And I remember that moment, and I was like, I do not like the version of myself of who I am becoming. And it wasn't about the physical, it was about the inner strength and the inner confidence and the feeling of just being, certain about like my life path or just myself. And that was becoming that way for me because I stopped taking care of myself. I had my daughter at 21 years old. And so my life in my 20s was really spent raising children and trying to put food on the table and being a career woman and focusing on all that stuff first. And also in the Filipino culture, you take care of yourself first. You're freaking selfish, right? So it's like, what is self-care? What does it mean to
Gotta put
actually
yourself last.
yeah, right, community first and family first. And so I remember like my mental health was declining. I was starting to feel the same like anxiety and depression that I was like feeling back when I was a teenager. And I was like, this is not okay, because I spent 4 years on antidepressants, and there's hell no way I'm going back to that, especially when I have two young girls looking at me, because I was lifeless. Like while my mood was stable, I was also lifeless. And so that was the decision that I made, to start eating healthier 2 weeks later and start exercising, which was so hard for me because I had never done that in my adult life, except for like before the wedding. And even that was like for 3 months. It was like nothing sustainable. And so yeah, I committed to eating healthier, learning what food actually meant to me, rebuilding a relationship with food, actually moving my body, and telling myself, yeah, mom is going to get some alone time today, and she's going to put herself first and exercise and take care of her.
Yeah, that itself probably speaks volumes, because younger girls look up to and they borrow those things. And actually your aha moment makes me think about like how many little instances along the way when we were little where we taught to not like ourselves, right? To like, you hear your titas or something saying like, oh, you're getting a little chubby over there, or like you should be like this. And this other thing that you talked about in your blog of like there's a lot of should, right, in Filipino culture.
Yeah.
And just those small nuggets along the way growing up, they make these big impacts later that we have to later unlearn and unprogram. So it's amazing. I feel like what you're doing is like, hey, let's stop the train early on, get off, and make sure we're on the right one before this just goes out of hand.
Yeah.
And I actually love.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you have something to say?
No. I'm affirming everything that you're saying right now.
Yeah, because it's true. There's like I'm in my 20s, right? So we start to do this work, but why not start earlier? Like, why not start talking to younger girls about sexuality earlier? Not in a way that is like, yeah, they're still innocent, but there's a right way to start allowing girls to feel like they have autonomy, they have power over these things. So I'm actually curious, do you start to talk to your daughters or even younger girls about these things, and like what's the approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to like I remember I remember my mom when it came to like my period, she just like kind of dropped off that like box, like back in the day. So I'm 37. So like when I was like 12, I think, you'd get like Kotex boxes that was like, welcome to your period. And it was like a little care package, right? That the school would have. And so she just was like, here's a box. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with any of that. I remember getting my first period, and I was like, holy shit, I think I'm dying, because I woke up and like blood was like everywhere, right? And I'm just like, holy shit. And like my mom's not around. And anyways, it was a little traumatic at the time. And also funny because now I'm looking back at it, you're like, you're not dying. You just had your period.
Yeah. But we didn't talk about it.
No, they didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about your body. The only things that they brought up about your body in a Filipino household, especially in that generation, was like you're too fat or you're too skinny. Like just all these things that needed
more, eat less.
Yeah. Or like, wow, that's a nice dress. It's too short. You know, like it was always like a backhanded comment.
Yeah.
So I highly believe that children should be taught proper sex education as early as 4 or 6 years old if possible. And when I say proper education and also like age based, you know, what the first things that you can start off with is like just talking about body parts. And rather than like, you know, in the Filipino culture, we like to call things like bekbek, right? Like that's the nickname for vagina. I strongly believe that, you know, children should be taught the actual scientific name of their body parts and their body anatomy, because in the event, God forbid anything happened to them, but in the event something does happen to them unconsensually, they have the ability to then express it to an adult in their life.
Wow.
And you know, this is reflecting back on my experience when I was molested by like an uncle family friend. I tried to talk to my mom, but I didn't have the language.
Wow.
And so she actually immediately was like, I'm sure your uncle didn't do that. And I'm like, okay, maybe he didn't. Like was my immediate thought.
Yeah.
And I was like, because I didn't know how to call my actual body parts and name it. And when I would point and describe, it was pretty much dismissed.
Yeah.
And to me, I think it's like
almost like shameful to have to like describe it in that way.
Or I mean, you know, especially if like, and this is the sad thing. This is the sad thing about my work that I'm discovering. So many women who are in Asian immigrant cultures in the US have dealt with sexual molestation or child molestation in their younger years by someone in their family. And the fact that they don't have the language around their own body parts, to me, is the reason why so much shame starts. Because they don't even know, like they don't even know how to say it. They don't even know how to describe it. They don't even know if as a female, and this happens to men too, but you know, I work with women. And so for a lot of the women I work with, when they do talk about, you know, any kind of sexual trauma and it happens at a young age, the reason why they've never shared it is because they didn't know how to talk about it.
As if we needed another barrier to getting
right. And so yeah, to me, I think it's important for at any age to start talking about it. I think it's important that we talk about consent and what consent means, and to also be very clear that when no is no, no is no, and to also be very clear that yes can be yes up to a certain point, but like intercourse, if you're not saying yes to intercourse, but you're saying yes to being made out with, or you're saying yes to foreplay but no to intercourse, that is also a part of consent. Yeah, that's legitimate and that's okay. And I also believe, like, in terms of sexual education, I firmly believe that we need to step away from the abstinent-based sex and also the shame-based sex education that's being passed down. Oh, and also the hetero-based sex that's being taught, because it's like we're no longer in a culture where it's just male-female. We're in a culture where there's so much more gender fluidity. We're in a culture where everything is becoming non-binary. We're in a culture where everybody is being able to identify their own agency within their own bodies. And so the more and more we can embrace not making people feel ashamed for these like intersectionalities of their lives, then the more acceptance that we'll have, and the more understanding, and then communication around sex, love, and relationships, for sure.
Oh, so many layers.
So many layers.
Start. No,
we start by talking about it. I mean, like this conversation right here. I mean, you know, your podcast is mostly for the Filipino audience, and so for someone to actually not be ashamed to talk about sex, hopefully it just brings up a little nugget in somebody else to be like, actually, there's something there, you know?
Absolutely, yes. Just a little side story.
Yeah.
Following my assault, I actually went into a lot of like activism to help other survivors find justice. But I realized where we actually needed to start was not by like, who's the perpetrator, like what sentence do we get, all this stuff. It actually starts like with education and just holding spaces for women to have dialogue about something that's happened to them. And second, for men to start finding the language about consent and like just even like unlearning things. Like it just starts with the dialogue and the learning. And when I went into like faith-based communities and I wanted to talk about consent, it was a lot of like, oh, we don't talk about that because we actually don't want to promote that it's okay to have sex early on. And when I found, I was like, okay, everyone in this audience, raise your hand if you know somebody in the community or have heard that has been in some way, affected by sexual assault, things like that. And everyone raise your hands. So I'm like, it's still happening. It's like, just because we're promoting something else, it doesn't mean that's not happening. And so just by talking about it, I feel like you're right. Dialogue is kind of where it starts, because that's for so long we've been in taboo. So anyways, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, of course.
I wanted to talk about like a lot of your journey is this like awakening and like getting this like higher consciousness about relationships and love and unprogramming these expectations that we've learned as Filipino women. We just couldn't talk about. And it's not just only from society, right? Like there's things that have been perpetuated in intergenerationally through Filipino relationship models, right?
Yeah.
You around us and like what our aunties and uncles or what our parents are going through and what is normalized. So question to you is, what do you think has been passed down from generations, not even in just generals, but maybe like the intricate relationship dynamics and power dynamics in relationships, like what women are allowed to feel, what men are allowed to feel and not feel? Like what are you seeing that has been passed down in Filipino generations and like relationship norms, maybe playing out very real for Filipino women in the modern context now that we need to start getting real about?
Yeah, as you're saying that, the one message that comes down to mind for me from a lot of actual older generation Filipino Americans, or like, yeah, Filipino Americans or Filipinos, was you have to be a strong woman. And you have to be strong, and life is hard and marriage is hard, and you just have to put up with it, and you just have to pray about it, and you've chosen this, so you're committed to that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, so are you saying that because I have to choose to be a strong woman, I have to put up with everything and put it on my back and carry it all because I have to be strong? And so I think there was this like message of almost, while yes, I think it's martyrdom for sure. It's like, like the picture that I'm coming up in my head is like when my mom would say, you have to just be a strong woman and act like you have to be a strong wife. I almost like think what she might be seeing in her head is like Jesus carrying the cross to his own crucifixion, right? And in some way that like visualization is like coming to my mind, because I'm like, this is what that generation has also told women to do in their relationships. You have to carry the cross that you bared. You chose this, so carry that. And I just think that what that does for us is that it doesn't allow us to create the boundaries that we need for our own well-being as women. It tells us to step into this martyrdom role and to self-sacrifice and to self-abandon for the community, which is family, and for your family unit and the thing that you're passing down. And it also, I think, to some degree, like, I mean, I hate to say this and I hate to call this out, and it's not all men and it's not all Filipino men, but from what I've witnessed is like so many Filipino men don't get held accountable for their responsibility to things because the women have to carry it.
Yeah.
And there's almost like it's okay. Like, make sure that you're the one who's like handling the bills because he's not going to be able to carry it, or he has to be told every single thing of what to do. That's just how they are. And I just remember like thinking to myself, really, like that's what a like committed relationship is supposed to look like in a Filipino culture.
Yeah. And even with it's actually more normal than I realized, because you brought it up. Just like easily forgiving, like what, men and families do. I always like will hear stories of like, oh, uncle like had an affair, but like she had to just like take it on and like be okay with it. If it was the other way around, it would just be unforgiving completely. But almost this like, ex- you like how often Filipino men get dismissed, not held accountable, like you said, and then women take that on and have to be the strong women.
Yeah, I was thinking about like why that is the way that that is. And I was actually thinking about how much this is ancestral wounds that we in like the modern day Filipinos have carried. If we go back to history, and this is just a theory, and I haven't done too much research on this in terms of like generational wounds and but it does make sense. And so if we think about like babaylans, which were our female shamans and the leaders in our communities back then, before Spanish came over to colonize them, what they actually did to colonize all of Filipino or all of the Philippines was they knew that the women were the ones that provided the wisdom to the communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for the men's, like the chiefs, those leaders to become colonized, our Spanish colonizers knew they had to go through the babaylans because we were the healers, we were the wisdom, we were the ones that held all the wisdom, and we were the ones that men would typically come to and get their wisdom about food, crops, political stuff, whatever, right? And so there was a lot of manipulation that happened. And I think because of that, what we've carried a lot of shame and guilt for changing the ways in which things have been done, and also then to just carry that shame and guilt. And so men get to do what they do because it's been taught generationally and culturally through history that this is the way it needs to be. So because the babaylans have also like went down and passed down like, oh, listen to the Spanish priests, listen to the men, listen to that, like this is what the message has been passed down to say, and it happens intergenerationally and throughout culture and time. Now that's just my theory. I'm pretty sure somebody else who's like totally examined colonization has probably found out like the real parts of it, but
accurate for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, if we think about like even nowadays where we're at in time and culture, when we're thinking about oppression and privilege, like we're starting to see it, right? Like how it's been a generational thing and how it's been passed down for over 400 years. And so if we look at the same situation with what we're dealing with in the States with Black lives and with oppression and white privilege, it's the similar situation in our colonized history with Filipino culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. It's like history just came back to manifest itself some more. So this is why we do the uprooting and the unprogramming work, so we can kind of like stop.
We can stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and I think, there isn't, I think because there's so much shame for women when we are told, like when women finally say enough is enough, or I have a voice, or this is the way that I want things, and they're immediately shut down or told like you're being too much or you're being too loud. And I think back to with like Filipino in Filipino families, when you see the single aunt who is like divorced but like living her best life.
Oh my gosh, we all have one.
We all have one, right? But the amount of shit that other Filipinos say about her because she's happy.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
like
that doesn't make sense because you're all kind of miserable, but she's happy.
Right. But think about what you witness as a child when you're hearing that from your mom or your aunts about another woman who is older and who doesn't have a partner because she just left her husband or whatever, and she's happy, she's thriving. But like here's like the rest of the aunties going, oh my God, she left her husband, she's gonna die alone, blah blah blah, now she's a slut. Of course, as a young child, you're like, oh, maybe that's bad.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be that. I shouldn't be like that aunt.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, I think like we just need to just pause for a second and just be like, let's just actually ask the auntie who's having her best life what she's actually been through, and allow her to share her story rather than continuing the stories of others.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is, when you say this, I realize like how many similarities maybe other families and within our culture have with this, because I was like, oh, I'm, you know, I'm not the only one observing this within my own relative circle. And I think it's because there is, it's cultural, you know, and I actually, I love that you brought up, looking back to how women were, in the Philippines pre-colonial and how we had that power. I think that's so powerful to keep reminding ourselves, that there was a different economy of respect and, set up for us. And, you know, this isn't totally out of like,
Left
it's
field.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, left field, that we're trying to get back to this. I
Yeah.
actually was doing some research, on this, and it looks like shamans, right? The
Mm-hmm.
islands, were mostly women, and then there were also, like men who, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, I don't know if you can explain this better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, you know, it's so babaylans were predominantly women, or they were actually womanized men, which meant for them it was gay men, or gender nonconforming, or bakla, or trans men, right? And so the craziest thing to me is that back then there was so much more acceptance around gender fluidity.
Mhm.
And being a trans man or being a gay man back then, pre-colonial times, was celebrated, because that meant you were one of the chosen one who were closer to God, the deities and the gods, because you were seen as like a female, but you had like mystical shamanistic powers, and
Yeah.
also the same thing that Babaylan did. And it's crazy to me because, you know, when you think about some of the Filipino culture now, some, not all, like some older generation Filipinos have such a like disdain towards the gay culture,
I
right?
kind of mentioned that, actually, yeah.
Yeah, which is like wild to me, because I'm like, wait, in history,
Yeah.
we really honored and celebrated this as Filipinos.
Yeah, like we kind of like other them, but then back
Yeah.
then there is like kind of like respect and like distinct roles tied to that. So
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I want to, you know, keep track of time for us and and be
Yeah,
respectful.
we're good. We're
And
good.
okay, cool. It's just like we're digging in.
We should just keep digging.
Okay. And I was like, I don't want to be like, and that's it for now.
Oh,
Everyone,
we should keep digging. Let's keep digging.
you're all in the deep end now. Bye.
We're digging. We're swimming there. We're going.
Now that we're swimming with the sharks that we want to
Yeah.
be with, because this is something that, Filipino women, I think we need to start just getting so real about, so that we can start calling out things as we need to and empowering ourselves in relationships. You know, something I just found out is that, since the 1990s in the Philippines, divorce has actually been outlawed. Did you know that? And it was just passed a bill today to allow women again to file for divorce legally earlier this year. And so that ties into
Wow.
this whole martyrdom aspect, that like you stay and you fight, you put up with it. And
Yeah.
I was like, the reasoning for that when I looked at it is because they didn't want to take away from like the meaning and the sacredness of marriage, and for women to, not have support in case their husbands wanted a divorce. It's so backwards, but I was like, wow, it was just this year. And so now we're like, what do you think of that?
I mean, I like think it's bullshit. I also know that I think from my research too that the Philippines is one of the hardest countries to actually get divorced from, and some of the divorce rules are really kind of weird. Like like your marriage can be completely annulled if the woman happens to have sex with somebody else. So if the woman has the affair, that's when the divorce is like finalized. There's also something along the lines of like, if the woman happens to be lesbian or falls in love with a woman, that can also annul like the wedding itself. I mean, there's so many things against like the female sexuality in the Philippines towards like the women that just it's almost like, wow, really? Like
Yeah.
really? Like that is insane to me. And so again, it's like
It's
you
encoded. It's like,
it's encoded in like our DNA to just stick to things that might not feel right, because if you do, there's all this legal reason why it's shameful.
Yeah.
and all this like cultural reason and Catholicism reason, or like, you know, religious reason why it's shameful. And because like religion is so woven into the belief systems of a lot of Filipinos, it's like, you know, they choose to stay because it's worse to leave.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy because the whole culture of staying and choosing to stay, being a strong woman is ingrained internally, domestically, like in our communities, like that's kind of what you have to do. And then also it's out in policy, it's institutionally, it's systemically, it's also ingrained. So, and who benefits and who gets the disadvantage?
Right.
Benefit and women don't. So like I think these are just all really important to take into account. Like it's still happening in the modern day, and it has its continued effects in our own interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And so I reflect on like, and this is why I'm really thankful for this talk, because if I'm getting really real and vulnerable, because I feel like you give the space to do that, you know, I'm just getting out of what has, looking back, been a very just traumatic and like um, relationship. You know, there was, you know, abuse of all that I couldn't even name. But looking back, it's like, wow, why did you allow repeatedly and justify repeatedly and normalize repeatedly? And just a lot of this reflection of like, you can call out things as it is and say like, oh, it was abuse, oh, it was like a manipulation, oh, but it's like, where did the allowance come in? Where did it come in your mind that this was something that you had to put up with repeatedly?
Yeah.
And that's where I realized there was roots in that has been taught. And so there's a lot of things to, I think, celebrate about Filipino culture and relationship. And I actually want to ask you like what, you know, what that is. And so it's like, what do we first have to really uproot for women, like women listening? What do we need to look at and uproot in what we've been taught, you know, along with like Filipino strong women concepts and martyrdom? And then what can we actually start cherishing about what that is special about the Filipino women that we can feel we can embrace in relationships and feel empowered by?
Yeah. So, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is like going back again to our history. Like, women were the strong ones. We were babaylans, we were the healers. We were pretty much the, the, we were the sex that like shaped our culture. We were the ones that allowed for that self-expression. We were the strong ones, and we always have been. But that also meant that we had a voice, and that voice was something to be heard. And I think, like, first and foremost, the one thing that always comes to mind for me is, you know, when people talk about, you know, dating a Filipino woman, they're always like, man, she's so loud, or like, she's so expressive, or like, you know, they love it because like we are vibrant, right? Like we are vibrant, we use our voice, we speak our minds. And I think like that always has to come first and foremost, no matter what, in any relationship. And so when I think about as Filipino women, like one thing to celebrate is that as Filipino women, you are strong for yourself first, no matter what,
Mm.
as an individual. And then you have the ability to start adding to your, you know, your buckets in your life of like what you want that to be. So first and foremost, be strong for yourself and know that you have the power to be strong on yourself, by yourself, on your own, independently, with or without a partner. I think that's like first and foremost, because what oftentimes happens is so much of like the Filipino culture and also Western society culture puts a lot of pressure on coupledom and marriage being like the number one relationship that is supposed to be there through like the thick of time. I mean, yes, while I still honor and truly believe like marriages and commitment and partnerships and long-term partnerships are vital and important, I also think though the number one relationship that you need to have and be married to is the one that you have with yourself first and foremost. Both people, both parties, all parties. If you have multiple partners in your relationship, all people need to be committed to themselves first before entering any type of relationship or partnership. So that needs to be first and foremost. Now, in terms of the things to look out for, which I feel like so oftentimes as like Filipino women we dismiss in relationships is the gaslighting that happens in relationships. And it's very, very minor. It often happens when your partner or a partner will dismiss your feelings or shut your feelings down and tell you that your feelings are not valid. And so to me, that's always I'm sorry?
Or make you feel crazy for them.
Or make you feel crazy for them, or have you second guess your feelings and emotions.
Yes. So much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much of that happens. And I've witnessed this with my parents, and I've witnessed this with like my dad and my mom. Oh, that's not how you should feel. You know, like I remember always hearing that. And I mean, I was taught that too. Like I was told, you know, when I was too emotional or when I would be sad, my parents were like, why are you depressed? You shouldn't be sad. You have a roof over your head. I'm like, because I don't have friends, because you don't let me out, you know, like I don't have socialization. Like you want me to be just doing my homework all the time. Or you don't understand me, or you're not caring to know who I am as an individual. And so, yeah, I think first and foremost, if you're in a relationship that starts to gaslight you in any way, like that's something to kind of, you know, keep in mind. The other thing too is, so oftentimes in Filipino relationships, what I've witnessed is women taking care of the adult men. And this happens a lot, not just in younger couples, but I see it a lot in older generations. And that's what we've witnessed. And that's what we model as this generation of Filipinos, right? Like we model this idea that we see our fathers or our uncles being cared for as adult children by the wives. And, you know, to me, like there are going to be women out there who love to care for their men in that way. So I'm not going to dismiss that. And I'm going to acknowledge that, because I do think that that is a beautiful thing. However, if you as a woman, if you're listening to this and for whatever reason that does not sit well with you, that you don't want to care for your partner in a way that is like you caring for your children, that's another red flag, because that's something that we've witnessed growing up. The men just sit around and watch TV, and moms are literally like getting the plates and bringing it to the men. And while again,
taking care of the kids,
while taking care of the children, while they're just doing that. And again, like there's no problem with that. But in modern day society, we are not in the same type of family structures where the women are no longer working and all they're doing is caring for the family and the household and all that stuff. And so to me, I think that's just something else to like look out for. Are you modeling the same behavior as what you've seen in your parents' relationships or in other older generational relationships? And if that is not a behavior that you want to model for your own, just stop for a minute and just ask yourself, where am I learning my own patterns? Where am I learning my own behavior? How am I showing up in this relationship? And how have I seen this modeled to me in the past? Because we as adults will bring all of the influences from either past relationships or the relationships that we've witnessed from our parents into our new ones and into our current adult ones. It's just something that we do because it's what we've been taught. And so if you want to disrupt that, if you want to change that, if you want to stop that, like you just have to just pause for a second and ask yourself, is this how I want to continue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost feels like just take a huge step back and do an audit of like,
do a quick audit. Yeah.
Like how am I showing up in relationships in this one, and why? Where is that coming from? Is this actually true to me? Because I feel like that's not a question we ask ourselves. Like, is this just what I'm taught should be done, or what feels truest to me? And like, again, like you said, your purest form of yourself, right? And I feel like we're not taught that we can ask ourselves that question, like, what is the purest form of myself? And that's a whole theory. That doesn't take overnight. Again, like, oh, that's the purest form.
Yeah. And you know, like I'll leave a little tip for those people who are like, well, how do I know what is intuition and how do I know what is intuitively true to me? Because a lot of people, like, that's the biggest question I get. And so like when I teach emotional intelligence, like people are like, how do you learn how to become emotionally intelligent? And I'm like, your body and your emotions live in the same fucking place. They live in your body, right? And your emotions is also stored in your body somatically. So when you have a somatic experience, so if you can imagine being angry, where would your anger live first? For a lot of people, it's in the back, like in between their shoulders. For some people, it's in their chest. For some people, it feels restriction in their throat. And so when they start feeling triggered by some kind of emotion, I always like ask first, where is it living in your body? And so if something is being said to you, or if you're doing something that doesn't feel right, like just literally pause for a moment and like listen to your body and see if something feels like a block or something doesn't feel like it's flowing right. That's when you know. And if you're doing something, or if you're told to do something, you're asked to do something, and for whatever reason you're like, this doesn't fucking feel right to me, but I'm gonna do it anyways. Like notice even your thoughts. If you're doing something and you don't want to do it, then you're also abandoning yourself, which is why we aren't able to trust our bodies. So just pause for a minute. Do I want to do this? Is this true to me? Like you asked. And then if it's true to you, just check in with your body. Like, do I feel any blockages here? Is my head hurting? Or, do I feel a chest restriction? Is my gut like telling me a certain thing? All of that is your body communicating intelligence to you. And I think we just need to listen to it more.
Yeah. I love that you said that. I think sometimes the last place we go is to actually like listen, like, what is my body telling me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, head and heart. It's like your physical body is actually communicating with you when it comes to these
all
things.
the time, all the freaking time.
I'm learning that, and I feel like you have a wealth of knowledge behind that. Joe, one of the questions I ask is usually, okay, I guess not a question, but we talked earlier that, if you can go back to a certain time and place when you're younger, so younger Joe, if you can go back and meet younger Joe at a certain age, what, and like be a bigger ate to her, what age would that be, and what would you tell her?
I think I would go back to the moment I found out I was pregnant. I was like 20 years old. I was, oh God. I mean, I was scared as shit. Like 20 years old, and you're finding out you're fucking pregnant, and you're like, what is everyone going to think of me? Holy shit. I didn't even finish like school. I'm just barely starting my career. I would have told her, like, this is going to be the best thing that happens to you. Don't worry about it. It's going to be the best thing. And you're going to have so many life lessons after this. And don't freak out as much. You're not going to kill the kid. That's, I think, what I would tell her. I mean, yeah, that's what I would say to her.
And we've talked about so many different topics.
Yeah.
In this discussion. And I thank you for that, for just opening up your heart and your wisdom to all this. Like you've gone through a lot of your own journey, I think, to start gifting it to other women who maybe couldn't even name it for themselves, but now it's like we can start really doing the inner work. If you had a message to send to Filipino women listening to this, who could be going through, a hard time relationship wise, or even with self-love, and just wanting to start to explore, like, what does it mean to be emotionally fit, healthy, and sexually liberated? What would that message to her be?
Don't be afraid to reach out for help. I think so oftentimes as Filipino women, we are taught to not ask for help because we're going to owe someone something. And that if we ask for help, we're no longer strong. And that if we ask for help, it means that we're unable to, do the things that like God says that we should be able to do. And I think to myself, like, I've spent a good portion of my life not asking for help because I felt ashamed for it. And so I have carried a lot on my own, which in some ways has been my superpower because I've been able to like just have a life full of experience. But if there's something that I've learned in the last 2 years, which is to ask for help when I need it, asking for help doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you really strong. Because it gives you an opportunity to say, I need people and I'm carrying a lot and I need to be able to carry a little bit more so I can get a little further and I need your help. And that to me is fucking strength right there. That's resilience.
Yeah.
Being able to say, I need you is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. And the right people will come in. I feel like sometimes we
Always
feel
the right
it's
people.
like wrong words, right? It's all like the universe just gives you the right people.
Yeah. And I also think too, like this whole shame around asking for help just needs to stop. Because my mom told me that too. Like if you ask for help, it means you're gonna owe them something, and you don't want to owe anybody anything. You don't want to be indebted to somebody. And in the last 2 years, I have really tried to like pull back the layers of that kind of wound of asking for help and feeling ashamed for asking for help. And every single time I have actually reached out for help, I am exponentially gifted with support I never thought I would ever have in my lifetime. And so that has been so incredible and amazing. And it's also made me feel more human.
Love that. Yeah, absolutely. So we come to the end of our talk.
Mm.
Is there any way people can ask for help from, do you have any things coming up and things that they can explore with like any stuff that you can offer?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do my coaching. So if you guys want to work with me, if you guys need a relationship and sex coach, that's definitely something that you guys can reach out to me for. My website is www.gofitjo.com. That's GoFitJo. And then you can also find me on everything social at GoFitJo, GoFitJo. I have a 12-week Women in Progress program that I do that allows women to really understand their inner landscape, understand their emotional well-being. I also help to teach women in that same program what it means to have a conscious relationship and how to consciously communicate. In addition to helping them just kind of embrace their sexuality and release a little bit of their sexual shame. And then I also have a 6-week program where it's a coaching container where we just talk about sexuality and gives a space to really kind of have the conversations that you've never had growing up. And it's kind of like, the sex ed you never really had. So that is something that I do also. And if you guys want to enroll, if you guys want to check it out, just check it out on my site.
Can we just incorporate your programs in schools and like how?
I mean, one day, yeah. It was interesting. One of the feedback that I got from somebody, which totally warmed my heart. She was like, I wish I had these tools 15 years ago. And I said, I wish I did too.
Yeah, save a lot of women from going in the wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't think it necessarily would save women from going along the wrong directions. I think it would just give us more knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I think once we have a little bit, when we have more knowledge, we have the ability to make a much more informed choice in our life. Right. And so that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Where can I sign up? I'm going to be signing up. Jo, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Oh my God, like everything you've shared is such a gift to us. Please keep going. We need your light and your love, your vulnerability in this world. You're doing freeing work, and I just appreciate and acknowledge you so much from the community. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. Feel free to leave a comment and share with a friend. And if you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram at Filipina on the Rise. I love hearing from you all and answering messages. Thanks so much again, and I'll see you on the next Filipina on the Rise.